This is a CAD company main girdle set. We only used it on the real high horsepower applications. It effectively turns your 2-bolt block into a 4-bolt block. We use it on all the, like I say, the big turbo cars and such. Most of the time you're using a dry sump setup, and so what we're doing, we plug the oil, we tap and plug the oiling holes here for the oil pump and the drive rod and the oil pickup. Now we're test fitting this. We've got the crank just laid in there right now, and we've got the studs installed on the block, and we're test fitting the side pieces for clearance between the cap and the plate. We've already clearanced this one. It was touching a little bit. Other places to check clearance is the front. You want to make sure that the plates do not stick out in front of the timing cover or behind the bell housing. Sometimes you got to do a little bit of grinding and filing to make things fit, but you know that's normal in all hot rodding. If you don't think you can handle fitting something like this, you got to have a machine shop do it. The other thing, the reason we have the crank laid in too is checking clearance on the counterweights of the crank, making sure that they clear the shaft, the plates here. A lot of times, now this crank's been worked over and polished up, but a lot of times there's casting lines on the crank that you might want to just have to clean those off to clear. Once this all fits, what we do, we pull the plates back off, we put a thin layer of silicone between the block and the plate, and we install the nuts that are all countersunk in here. Tighten her down and let it set a day or two to dry. Okay, the side plates have been checked for clearance and modified as necessary. We put a layer of silicone between the plate and the block, set the plates down, installed all the nuts, and torqued them down. The next step is all your main caps. The top side of them, where this cap is going to sit down on them, they have to be flat. Now if you have a cap grinder or a mill or a big sanding disc or a good file, as long as you take all the high spots off them, that's good. You don't necessarily have to make them any shorter necessarily, but they have to be flat. Then you test fit each one of the caps on top of the original cap, and you make sure they're not touching on the sides here. These caps are just cast, and there's size differences between them all. The same with the block. So you need to check and make sure you got daylight on each side, or it's going to bind. And once you've got daylight on each side, you set them down on top of the cap. The other thing is you need to make sure you use a feeler gauge, and you make sure you've got some clearance underneath each cap. And you may have to put them in a cap grinder and grind as necessary, but that's what feeler gauges are for. You put her down there and you check and make sure you have some clearance before you even go to torquing the studs down. Once everything is clearanced and you torque the studs down, you go along each side, each cap, with a feeler gauge, and you check the clearance. And whatever that clearance is, subtract 2/1000ths from it. And that's the amount of shim you're going to want to put underneath this cap on this side. Now it'll be it'll be different on every one of them and from side to side. That's just the way it is. Unless you want to spend a whole lot of time on the cap grinder. And then, of course, you put your shims under there to where it lines up with the hole, and then you can put the rest of your bolts in and torque them down. We generally put the main studs on this with oil. You're probably going to go for about 110 to 115 foot-pounds. The outside bolts, probably going to put down about 90, except for the rear cap ones. They're only 3/8, so you're going to go about 35 on them. And once you've got these caps fitted without putting the outside bolts in, you need to line home this setup, okay? Because it is going to change. Might change a couple thousandths for that matter, but generally someone that can line home this size of block can take care of it real easy. They'll need a mandrel that's up there just short of 3.5 inches though, so you might check with your machine shop before you haul it to them, because it's not a real popular size mandrel. Anyway, get her all line honed, shim correctly, torque down, and you got a awful strong block combination.